Apologies live stream. Tonight, I am joined by Donald Kent, musician and artist. He is behind the recently released Seraph comic, and he's here tonight to talk about an article that he published, I believe, for the White People's Quarterly. And we're going to talk about the article. We're going to talk about quite a few other things. It's going to be a great conversation. I've been looking forward to this. I like Donald a lot. Donald's a great guy. And I'm not just saying this because I'm about to tell him to take mute off the microphone. He's a very smart guy, very worldly. He's incredibly talented. You know, some of the more interesting maybe things you've seen visually from some of us here on YouTube, Donald has had a hand in, whether it's TAP, the After Parties logo, or not that you've seen it yet, but a soon to be released logo for a new project. So yeah, Donald's got his fingers in a lot of pots, and we're all really glad that he's part of this community. You know, if you remember from his previous appearance, he talked a little bit about how he found his way into, you know, what's called the alt-right. Not that any of us can agree on what to call ourselves, but Donald is here. We're going to talk about his article, and welcome back to the program. Donald, how are you doing tonight?
Very, very good. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's not delay. I'm actually going to screen share this article with the audience. We were talking a little bit about just exactly how we wanted to kick this off. And I think a good way to do it is to just, well, before we even talk about the article, just can you talk about your relationship with the White People's Quarterly and why you decided to write for them and what was the inspiration for this article?
Wow. Okay, so Tony at the White People's Quarterly, we spoke a bit on email. Obviously, I guess I'm self-defined alt-right. I'm very much involved in the cultural side. I'm an artist, art teacher, musician, writer, poet, and that's what I have to bring to the community. So, when I found out about that magazine, boy, I just jumped on it right away. And I spammed him with maybe 10 or 12 submissions. Wow. And he was like, okay, slow down there, Tiger. Anyway, so the idea is that he's hopefully going to sort of spread it out over various issues. So in the last issue, one of the things that I did was I wrote an article called White Art in the Postmodern Era. And that's what the topic of this show is going to be about primarily. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read through the article and discuss what is art, what does it mean to our movement, to white identity, politics, culture, etc. It's quite a big topic, and we'll do whatever we can to get through it, focusing on the article though. So me being a professional artist, art teacher, art student, etc., that was my life, that was my journey. And so I had a look on the sort of went through the belly of the beast, so to speak, regarding that whole institution. And the arts are, I would say, one of the biggest weapons of the left. They totally, it's to the point basically where the arts are kind of like the degenerates' caviar. It's something that, the far left can enjoy their sort of, their culture, if you will, within the echo chamber, within an echo chamber, and so it's extremely alienating to whites, especially straight whites, especially straight white Christians, straight white males. So, we're going to kind of open that up a bit. I think the average person, just in general, is sort of turned off by the arts. When you bring it up, generally people have this kind of, cringy, artsy fartsy, this and that. Like the arts have already been kind of ghettoized or relegated to like, well, that's for weirdos, or that's this or that and the other thing. But, in our time, in our history, the arts were extremely heroic. and much more integrated. I think, actually, I mean, if you were to just sort of walk around any city in Italy or in various places in Europe, you'd see how integrated it is. So there's very much to talk about, kind of looking in a bird's eye view of history, and how the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism got a hold of the arts at a certain point in time. And then, with the advent of psychoanalysis and photography, those two things really changed painting specifically. World War I and World War II were really, really traumatic experiences for Europe, of course. And so, this is the birth of communism and all these kinds of ideas. This is really the birth of modern art as we know it. So to kind of back up a little bit, I think it's important to try to define art in the broadest terms, because just for example, I lived in Asia for 5 years and I studied Chinese painting. And so, studying an art form of another culture, specifically one so alien and different from the West, really, really makes you love the West so much more. It gives you, and I really feel everybody should step out of the country for a while, and I mean, go to a non-Western country just for a little while and get a sense, if it's safe, obviously, of your own culture. So defining art is generally the creation of cultural objects that convey meaning, feeling, and parable according to aesthetic structures. So that's extremely general. But two of the really, really important key components here are what we call the elements of art and the principles of art. I did actually send you a graphic with that. I don't know if you can pop that up on the screen. Elements and principles of art. There is the timeline, and that's me. Not really. Here we go. So I don't know how much you can enlarge that a little bit, but on the left you have the elements. So what I'm really trying to do here is tell you the language of art. So you go to an art gallery or you see a work of art in anywhere. It could be an album cover or there's any place where you could see something. You really just have to ask yourself two questions. What is it, and do I like it? It's not terribly sophisticated. But the first question when you critique art is critical. Not understanding what you're looking at. Actually, if you could bring that graphic back up, I'm about to get into that a little bit. But understanding what you're looking at, knowing the language of what you're looking at is quite different. So, for example, Josh and myself are musicians. When we listen to music, it's quite different from someone who doesn't know how to play guitar, for example. So it's almost as if, let's say if you speak French and you listen to, French opera or something of that nature, you can enjoy it so much more. You speak the language. So the principles and elements of art are essentially the language: line, shape, color, value, form, texture, space. Those are the elements. Okay, so you could almost say like those are the notes on the keyboard. You've got scales, you have major and minor, etc. So then you put those elements together using the principles of balance, contrast, emphasis, movement, pattern, rhythm, unity. All those even sound musical in some sense, don't they? Right. So patterns, the eye tends to really enjoy patterns. That's something that someone in fashion design maybe could have a lot to say about. Emphasis and contrast. These are things that draw your attention to what is it that the art is trying to say. What is the meaning of it? So, and do we want to create balance or asymmetrical balance? Do we want to have unity or not? So not having unity, for example, could be part of the statement of a work of art. So this is just to kind of warm you up and give you some tools to go at art and to be able to look at it. And it's really unfair to put people in front of art and say, hey, what do you think? No, I don't know. Or, oh, I could do that. These kinds of things, we want to back out a bit and say, if you sat in front of a piano, could you just play honky tonk? No, you'd have to learn the notes and the keys and the songs, etc. So moving on, I have this theory that I've created. If you could open up the Bloom's taxonomy graphic that I sent you, it looks like a pyramid. There you are. Okay, so this is basically showing levels of cognitive ability, cognitive domain. The idea being that at really almost at any age, when we're learning something, we start off with knowledge. What are the facts? What is it that we want to know about this piece? Is it, this painting was created in 1950, or, it was made with what tools, who made it, what movement were they in? And then we begin to comprehend what it is that's going on. Oh, well, this is a response to nuclear war, or the fear of nuclear war in 1950s. Application, how was it put together? What's the aesthetics? For example, when you listen to Jimmy Page play guitar, as opposed to Van Halen, as opposed to classical guitars, they have different applications in which they play the notes, and so that has something to do with the expression, the emphasis, which comes back to the language of art we were talking about before. So now you're beginning to analyze things. You're creating your own analysis. And then once you have, that's in a sense where you're interpreting something. So you've decided that this painting is about X. Guernica, for example, by Picasso. It's a painting about I believe it was the Germans were allowed to bomb a town in Spain to test out their bombs. This is the town of Guernica. It's another story. Anyway, synthesis is where you connect these things. So you're synthesizing the painting with your own experience, with your life, the things that you know and understand, what matters to you as a person. So you kind of personalize it at that point. Yes, you can synthesize it with other artists of the day, or, if you look at Guernica and you see that it's a mural of this bombing of this town, you can think back to other murals in art history that show scenes of war, in the Roman period or etc. So this gives you a far greater understanding of the context and a much, much deeper experience of the artwork. So now we're getting into the meat of it here. Okay, so that's when you finally make your evaluation. I like this work of art because ABC, or I don't like this work of art because ABC. So in my theory of art critique, you basically flip that on its head. So my statement is that the ability to critique art is the ability to make art. So art doesn't come out of your hands or out of the pencil magically, etc. It comes through your spirit, through your mind, and then you can learn how to draw. You can learn how to paint. You can learn how to play guitar, how to dance, write plays. You can learn those things. Those are skills that you can learn. Artists, I should say, people who don't do art, they have this weird kind of, oh, you're so talented. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, years and years of blood, sweat, and tears of that rhymed, of working to gain these skills is just nothing. I'm just talented, right? You have to really, you have to treat it like an Olympic athlete. You have to treat it like a warrior. You have to be driven by passion to make meaning, to, in a sense, it's that's another thing we'll get to as we go down the road here. So if you flip this around here and you start from the top, the artist already knows something that it's like having a hot coal in your hand. You have to let it go. If you don't get it out, you could kind of lose your mind. I think this is sort of what is typical of artistic personalities, is that they have to get things out. If they don't, they may become alcoholics or just kind of lose it. That may be where the association with insanity comes, but that's a bit of a cliche, so I don't want to go down that path. So the artist then has to sort of, think through how am I going to express these ideas? Who else has expressed these ideas? In what ways have they done that? So we're kind of backtracking through synthesis. And then we begin to analyze, okay, yeah, this works, that doesn't work. I'm beginning to decide I'm going to compose this piece. If it's a work of art, music, painting, dance, this is where some form of analysis has to go into the play of, and Josh knows what I'm talking about since he writes music Also, now we're into the application. In his case, you might be going to the studio, and even engineering in a studio is a kind of art form. Okay, the painter gets their palette and their colors all set up. They have their drawings, studies that they've done ahead of time, and then we comprehend what it is that we're doing, and we go ahead and exercise those skills and ideas all together to form a work of art. So then we produce a work of knowledge. It's something that never existed before. It's a work of art, and it's born through us through this process. So then we send it out to the world, and then it's like a baby. It has to grow up and move out of the house and get a job and you get married. No, anyway, you get the idea. It has a life of its own. So if you're a great artist, you're successful at moving other people, and they can go through this process of cognitive exploration and understanding. If you're not a good artist, then people will get lost in the interpretations. They may be turned off by the aesthetics. There's the lack of skill may interrupt that. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes naive art has a great aesthetic power to it. So that's just understanding, critiquing art. You go at it, you ask yourself, what is it, and do I like it, or rather, why do I like it? So you develop a personal relationship with art. So all this is a lot of kind of lecturing here, but understanding that what I'm trying to do basically is take back the arts from the left, from cultural Marxism, which has alienated us. And so by teaching you, kind of giving you here's the cheat sheet, giving you a sense of the language, the process, and the purpose of what the arts are and how to make them, from inside out. So from there, I don't know, did you want to comment at all? Did you have any questions, Josh? Are you okay? Here I'm monopolizing the show here. So, that kind of makes its point. So let's say in history, we had the advent of psychoanalysis with Sigmund Freud, our favorite psychiatrist. And I'm sorry, that was being sarcastic. That kind of triggered surrealism. There was very, very many movements, Cubism, all the Dada. There were all these movements that essentially deconstructed art. And a lot of the spirit behind that is specifically from the cultural Marxist view, was to remove the arts from the power structure. In the past, you would see the church was the patron of the arts. The kings were the patron of the arts. Now, that's not to say that there weren't fantastic artists who the romantic artists or realists who talked about the nobility of the working class and these things. So anyway, this is I'm giving you the speedy version of art history here. And so I don't know if you can enlarge that at all, just to hopefully make it a little easier for the viewers to see. Main thing we want to do is kind of look at over there on the right, the far right, where it says modernism. Okay, so you have you've got these movements that, as I said, we're slowly and gradually breaking things down. So let's start off with Monet. Okay, Impressionism. This is the most cliche gift shop art that you can get, and I'm not knocking Impressionism, but in its day it was considered garbage because it just looked unfinished. The Academy of the day just scoffed at it. It was just considered just ridiculous. So you got to wonder, well, why is it that historians chose that, Impressionism, instead of what was the norm in the Academy? Well, once again, somehow whoever controls the museums, the art history, the literature, they control how we see our own history. This is a key point. This is a really, really key point. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get people to wake up to, is to kind of return to the greatness of the West. And I'm not really, I don't know how to say this. there is great value to Impressionism. It is a part of the Western mind in the sense of like, okay, photography came along. We don't need to paint hyper-realistic pictures anymore. Well, what is this stuff called painting? What is light and shadow? Let's explore this. And so that went on its way, and then it kind of broke down even further to like Cubism, where the idea of Cubism is to take a 2D view of 3D reality, to sort of like, if you could squash reality and flatten it and then kind of pick up the pieces and put it on a canvas, that would be Cubism. And so it's kind of a one-trick pony. It's interesting. It's very decorative, but I would say overall meaningless. And so, moving on, I would say surrealism, I think, is more interesting, but surrealism is essentially a reaction to psychoanalysis. It was, when psychoanalysis came on the scene, artists were fascinated with the science of the mind, psychology. Fascinating. Wow, let's get into this. And so it pioneered, or I should say, open doors for all kinds of exploration. In a sense, drawing dreams, drawing your imagination. And those aren't, specifically degenerate or bad per se. It's really how you use it and in what sense do you use it. So moving forward, after World War II, a lot of the great artists moved to America. And that's something that not a lot of people know. So they brought this man named Andre Breton, who was kind of the leader per se of the surrealist school, and him and several others, Willem de Kooning, they came over to New York City, and New York City is kind of a classic port for European immigrants, and so but New York City in the 1950s was totally different from what we know it today. You could rent a kind of a loft in Soho for $50 a month or something of that nature, and these guys would have these huge spaces and they carried on their art. So you can imagine how American artists in the time were just blown away by, wow, these are the, at the time, American artists, if you were not a legitimate artist unless you studied in Europe for a very long time. America was just kind of thought of as like a backwater in the arts. And so now we have all these great minds. They're in New York City. And over some time that birthed what we call abstract expressionism. So that's essentially the end of art per se, in the sense that is the ultimate deconstruction of painting and sculpture and Western art. So much so that you have, I can't remember the guy's name. He's a musical composer. He had a whole piece of music which is just him sitting at a piano. And that's what I mean about alienating people.
John Cage.
Yeah, John Cage. Thank you. See, the fellow musician here to help me out. Thank you, brother. So that's where art becomes, this is what postmodern art is it's conceptual art. So it's no longer about skill. It's no longer about Western culture, mythology, history, etc. It's kind of open up to anything and anyone. So, for example, when I went to get my teaching degree, you can imagine me, sort of 30-something white male in a college environment. I'd been living in Asia for 5 years, and I came back, and things had changed so much, and it's all feminists in the art department, and I can remember just discussing things with people in class and being told, like, didn't you get the memo? Like your time's over. You're done. You're the bad guy, and for example, I was told things like, drawing skill is patriarchal. Skill at art is just oppression by the patriarchy. And, I was so dumbfounded at the time. I actually, how, of course, it's a total horse manure. I was just like, no, but in a sense, it's this kind of, I don't know what to call it. I don't want to say it's a feminine way of thinking, but I do see a level of like non-accountability here in that kind of mentality. But anyway, we can debate that another time, I guess. So the direction of this whole thing is just it's upsetting to see how, I kind of bulleted right through that. I should talk a little bit about Jackson Pollock. I would say he was the last, and I would even say he was a last heroic Western artist, in the sense that it's like, we went to the moon, well, this is the age of Jackson Pollock. He went to the moon per se in painting, meaning that was like the final frontier. There was no more, really nothing else to deconstruct after that. So following him, and this is very strange, it's basically that's the birth of pop art and op art. So Andy Warhol is now the new hot thing. Now, in my opinion, I always say that Andy Warhol is the Antichrist of art. So, yeah, and I won't apologize for that. He is vapid. He's commercialism. He's gay. He's about fashion and fame. He's like the poster child. He's the father in some ways of postmodernism. For example, he, in his so-called studio, he would have an idea and then tell his lackeys to make it. So he didn't even actually make the pieces in some cases. The classic soup cans. Here it's very interesting because the communists would, they were afraid that, art was going to become this mechanized capitalist commodity where all art was the same. And then ironically, that's what postmodern art made it. So I don't know if that's some kind of pill pull or some kind of obfuscation of like, look over here and then sucker punch us in a sense. It's creepy and irritating. And right, the idea of, the fixation with famous people, everyone, we all know the phrase, everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame. And just the fakeness of it. These are prints, by the way, so they're done in they can be mass produced, is what I'm saying. And so conceptually, if someone was trying to sell this in an art gallery, they would talk about how making art that is easily mass produced, like this, that's the statement, that's the concept, is that our society is becoming so mechanized. I'm like, well, yeah, but you're making it more so. In fact, you're making the arts just exactly that. There's a perfect example right there. And, like, if you stop for a moment and look at this piece and then go back and apply the elements and principles, this is kind of an interesting thing. This is what would happen in an art class. So let's critique this for a second here. Well, right immediately, Josh, what are your impressions of this piece? Just give me whatever you feel, whatever you think. That one, yeah. Oh, you're on mute, buddy. Can't hear you.
Whoops. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just kind of ugly and jarring.
Ugly and jarring. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Andy Warhol.
There's no, I don't know what to focus on.
Excellent. Fascinating. So it's like discombobulating in a way.
Yeah.
Would you even call it a work of art?
No, I don't think so.
Fascinating, huh? Right. So now this, backtrack a little bit. Marcel Duchamp is a French surrealist. He's the guy that put the urinal in an art gallery as a kind of, I suppose he did that as a joke in a way, but I don't know who's laughing, but the art world took that and said, oh, when you recontextualize any item, then it becomes art, meaning anything can be art and anybody can be artists and that kind of, mentality. He is, by the way, he is a very sophisticated artist, but I think his doing that was like a spit in the face of the art institution. But at the same time, I'm not so sure whether I think he's a great artist. I think he is a product of his time. And that would be a whole other discussion to get and to break him down. He's kind of a very philosophical gentleman. But anyway, back to Andy Warhol. So, like I said, line, color, shape. Okay, so and pattern. We're seeing patterns here. We're seeing rhythm. But it's vapid. It's devoid. Okay, money signs. I get it. Oh, money, money, money. What are you saying about it? What does it mean? I mean, there's no this is a very flat piece. There's no depth. It's kind of like that joke you heard, and then somebody tells you again, and it's not funny the second time, and then the third time you really hate hearing that damn joke, Right. Yeah, and it gets worse and worse every time. So, the idea of like getting your fame off the fame of other people, there you go, like using these famous faces, again, it's just it tears you down. It doesn't lift you up. And then this is essentially the time when the art business really became a thing. Okay, so this is so basically you have the artist, and then you have the art galleries, or curators, museums, with the art institution, and the magazines, and then you have the public, including people who would buy art, the patrons of the arts. So the power shift went away from the artist and to the galleries, curators, museums, and critics. They now, from the time of pretty much Clement Greenberg and the abstract expressionism, from the 50s to now, they are the art world. They're the gatekeepers. So that's kind of one of the points that I bring up in my article, is that we are outside the gates. We're banished from that world. White people, white identity is the opposite. It's, in a sense, everything is pointed towards us to be the opposite of traditionalism and everything that Western civilization's about. Am I talking too much, or I don't know? Okay, all right. Welcome to the Don Show. All right. Well, why don't we just get right into the article here? And okay. Oh, thanks. So I'm going to pull my article up here. I'm just going to read. I think what would be cool to do, Josh, is to maybe kind of get your response to each paragraph. Sure, if there's anything that grabs you or needs to be clarified or whatever, anything you want to riff on, go for it.
Sure.
Okay, so white art in the postmodern era. Definitely get a copy of the White People's Quarterly. I suppose Josh can put a link down somewhere around this video so that you guys can pick up a copy. It's doing really well, and it's a really wonderful magazine. So let's get on board. Okay. Contemporary art is dominated by far left ideology, which is meant to destroy European cultural identity. The common public, namely traditionalist whites, are alienated by postmodern art. They do not feel at home within the upper echelons of the art establishment. Whites are alienated on the level of nonprofit community-based art organizations. In fact, the average middle-class white is the polar negative to all that postmodern art defines itself as. From the quasi-intellectual deconstructionism of radical nihilist philosophers that lay the academic bedrock of postmodernism, to the sheer physical medium and raw materials, such as the urinal, postmodern art is weaponized toward the white, who, through offense and pure bemusement, is meant to be shriveled up and dusted away. A straight white man has more chance of fitting through the eye of a needle than getting a grant to make art representing his experience and role in culture.
Yeah, that's a good turn of phrase. Makes me think of really anyone I've ever known. Am I coming through? Am I under your end?
Well, I hear. Maybe I need to mute. Hold. Are we getting an echo?
I can't. I mean, I'm not hearing anything with my earbuds, so hopefully the audience.
I hear you.
Let's just keep going then.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I think about all the people I knew who would complain about the direction that the art that they were educated about, or how they felt like it was good that certain funds or scholarships or fellowships would go to gay people or Black women or trans, whatever, because it's like they would say you need representation and it's perspectivity. You get all these different things. And if I could just share a quick story, I think I mentioned this somewhere on a broadcast before, but I knew a woman from Israel who was an opera singer, and she shared with me her grand vision of an art installation that she wanted to do. And it was a multi-room art installation where each room represented a different sense, and there would just be people fucking in each room. And I'm like, this is where government money is going to.
Yeah, that, I was like, yeah, okay, I'm following. And then that, I mean, this comes back to like the intelligence of the artist, like you may have, what are you trying to say? And you're losing the audience here. Like that makes no damn sense at all. And like to respond to what you're saying about representation, maybe, minorities and gays, etc., maybe they needed more representation in, I don't know, the 80s or something like this. But now they have it all. Oh, yeah. They have it all. And not only do they have it all, but boy, there's more money coming down the line. Look at the Obama Foundation, and even just anybody locally can just look up, local arts communities and grants, etc. And you're just going to see it's exclusively for people of color, minorities, So it's very obvious that it's just a propaganda wing of cultural Marxism. That this is kind of what I was talking about. People can go on there. The mission page is kind of vague, but I did actually go through there at some point, and I saw a story about the Obama Foundation as a kind of Antifa training front.
Oh gosh,
and, that's an entirely different direction and not the topic of this show. But I would maybe urge people to kind of go there and snoop around and see what you can find. So maybe I'll move on here. Okay, so the next paragraph. For this and many more reasons, whites must take it upon themselves to reclaim our glorious art history and mythos. We are the heirs to all the great Western art treasures, from Scythian jewelry to the wall paintings of Pompeii, from Notre Dame Cathedral to Mount Rushmore, from Baroque guitar to the broken guitars of rock and roll. Why are we not consciously immersed in the aesthetic richness of our own heritage as a daily norm? Aside from popular music and media that is wrought with commercialism, subliminal demoralization, parading mediocrity, and rewarding conformity, the white has an ocean of treasures from which to draw, each to his or her own interest. Whites must see themselves in these works, must take partial ownership in the civilization that brought all this aesthetic culture out of the void. Let our hearts and minds revel with wonder at the profound achievements and struggles our people have documented through our arts.
Yeah,
dramatic pause.
It's just, so you mentioned rock and roll here, and whites must see themselves in these works. This is something I thought a lot about, especially in the last year. I've been playing music, live music, recording music since I was 19, maybe. And I'm 33, so it's like we're closing in on 15 years. And how things have changed in New York City is pretty dramatic. A lot of clubs have closed down. It's not financially feasible to run these places, to book bands, and then a lot of the booking agents are kind of scummy. But, the thing that's kind of the most frustrating is just how whites look toward non-whites for their entertainment. Like they don't see themselves in their music or their art anymore. And it's like, well, I don't think that the music, some of the bands I played in sucked. I mean, I'll be honest, not all of it was great, but it's like, if people kind of looked to their own people to grow the community or grow the music or build a fan base, things really could have been different. For people I knew growing up or whatever, people, they put away their instruments because there wasn't a future for them. or they got jaded or whatever. And just, this line about whites must see themselves in their work, take partial ownership. The thing that really frustrates me is how whites have no interest in going to see a group of white musicians. It's like, oh, it's so boring, it's so drab, oh, it's so well, I mean, so the phrase pale, male, and stale, and it's it's a really distorted way of thinking about the world.
Yeah, that does bring some really interesting things to mind. Just the first thing that pops into my mind actually is the Grateful Dead culture. As hippie as it is, meaning as leftist as it may be, it's very white though. There's the music has a lot of roots in country music, and
Americana.
Yeah, and obviously there's two sides to that coin, but I would say that's and then maybe aside from country music as a genre, but it's odd how that works. And I in my lifetime, and probably not for kids growing up now, but in my lifetime it was not like that. I mean, I love soul music, I love jazz, blah blah blah. I'm not limited to my musical tastes by color or something of that nature. But it certainly wasn't mainstream at all. When like hip hop kind of came out and, NWA, Public Enemy, that was sort of radical in its day. It was like college radio stuff. Punk rock was the cool, edgy thing, but then, this was like black punk rock per se, and I think people were like, wow, what did this, but that's a whole other world. Now today it's quite the opposite. You've got like the phenomenon of the wigger, the sort of whites that don't have anything white about them in terms of like just their general cultural aesthetic, their behavior, these sorts of things. And so that's kind of the point of what this discussion is about, is reclaiming and kind of going back home to these arts. So it's a big topic,
Well, even the phenomenon of the wigger is just, you don't get that unless you kind of displace whites from the field of vision in terms of the music that's being produced, the music that's being promoted. Why would a guy, I mean, this is where I grew up. It was suburbs. I didn't even grow up in the inner city. So it wasn't like these kids ever met black people per se. It was an Italian neighborhood somewhere, and they would have the flat rimmed hat, and they have the jersey, and they have the long like white dress shirt or white shirt, which is like a gown.
I know.
That's kind of like a Southern thing for a while. And they're talking. They have an affect of like a ghetto black person, and they're listening to the ghetto black music, and it's just that would never happen if there wasn't a intentional cultural shift away toward these other kind of racial approaches to music.
This brings up an interesting topic. MTV was white, I'll tell you. When it started, all the way up until Yo MTV Raps started, that was just a show on there. And now it's, I would say, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't really watch it anymore because it seemed to be about 90% black. Nothing wrong with black music, right?
Obviously.
What's wrong is is us being replaced, is us being pushed out of our own areas. You had BET, you can create your own channels. So obviously we know who owns the hip hop industry and these things. So that's a whole other topic. But let me continue here. So next paragraph: the white stands alone outside the gilded gates of the art world, banished. The art world is run by the elite cultural mafia of so-called progressives. Its Warholian adherents traipsing around at vapid gallery openings, trying to create their 15 minutes of fame. Gallery owners paid off enjoy ego stroking and pandering from the wannabe artists that toe the line of their university professors' platitudes. Nothing could be less inclusive or farther from the spirit of art. The irony of an institution that represents art being so hyper-colloquial, forming an army of propagandists, is surreal. Dada on steroids. Dada is basically it's basically an art movement of absurdity. It's just everything should be absurd, So the thing about gallery owners being paid off, I'm going to tell you a story that is one of these stories where I can't use the names.
Sure.
In college, one of my professors he was, quote, a famous contemporary artist at the time. He has a piece in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, which is like as high as you can go, basically. And so he was in the art world in the 80s and in that scene. And, whatever, talking to him privately, like, how do you, as a young artist, a college kid, I'm so anxious. How do I break into the art world? How do I get in? And he told me that, so-and-so, that the top most famous guy in the art world right now, well, he had basically threw a party in his studio where he went and invited all of the art critics in New York City and several of the art gallery owners. And at the party, he had paid for prostitutes for every single one of them, of their gender of their choice. And the next day, articles are coming out about what a great artist. This is the new guy. This is the new thing. Spend your money over here. Blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. So, I mean, it's so vulgar. It's just so vulgar and like the opposite of what art should be, from my conservative view, right? So that's what I'm referring to there. So I'm unless there was something you wanted to comment on, should I move on?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What if today's white artists and creators in an art establishment hostile to traditionalism? What are the artist's duties, responsibilities, and purpose in a time of grim speculation and growing crisis towards the erasure of Westerners? The artist must be educated in and strive towards alignment with fundamental standards of art that evolved throughout our history and diaspora. While whites have their diverse ethnic voices, we can no longer be obvious to. Let's start over. While whites have their diverse ethnic voices, we can no longer be oblivious to the cultural paradigm that wishes to replace us. And from this context, must be conscious that white art is dissident art. Whether white creators and performers choose to express this explicitly or not, this kind of art goes against the tenets of postmodernism and is an affront to the art world's power structure. Innately civilized, whites tend either to be unaware of this, shy away from it, or deny this power structure. As such, whites who are aware of this cultural oppression may lead the way to encourage other whites to follow. Art in the alt-right has been primarily internet-based. These producers can take their works into real life, either through creating their own art venues or by guerrilla means. So that's quite loaded. There was a ton of information in that. I don't know if you wanted to respond before I.
Yeah, just elaborate if you can.
Yeah, the point that I was making about aligning ourselves with fundamental standards of art that evolved through our history. That's why I spoke earlier about elements and principles. When in postmodernism, there are no elements and principles. It's almost purely conceptual, and so this is what deconstruction is. When you take out any structure through which to view something critically and to judge it, then art is no more. You see that it's anti-art. They've destroyed art in that sense, and specifically our art. You see, so. This is, I think this is debatable. I suppose another person in the arts could come forward and say, no, I think you should do this and not that, and I welcome anybody to come and talk with me about that. But that's sort of a key thing there, is just mainly that we need to create our own institutions. Okay.
So I didn't watch this because I think at this point, still getting an echo a little bit.
All right, I'm going to mute you just for a second. I don't know how bad that goes. Okay, I'm muting.
I don't watch whatever's in the popular MTV, whatever. But it went around Twitter the past week, and I'm sure you saw it. I guess it was the VMAs or something to that effect, Video Music Awards, and the clip was of this morbidly obese black woman with a flute doing these trills and twerking at the same time. And you're talking about what, this need to have standards, and it's just. There's something I find really disturbing about kind of the white voyeurism of, like, especially black or gay art forms, if you want to call it that, where it's like the complete absence of standard is somehow what these people seem to be enjoying about it. I don't want to get really cynical and say that, like, they're unconsciously sneering, like they're having unconscious racial antagonism played out by elevating this fat, practically nude black woman dancing and trilling on her flute simultaneously, where it was, just incomprehensible to watch. But the idea of standard, it's clearly not there. And something that I've done, especially in the last year or so, not that I can share this, unfortunately, with the audience, is to kind of inject more of like a method into whether it's lyricism or song structure or whatever, because the absence of standard or structure is it's so prevalent, and it really makes music and like even like literature reading very not just like frustrating, but like torture. I don't know if you saw that clip.
Oh, I'm glad I didn't, because I don't know if I could sleep at night. You're making a really interesting point, because it used to be that every 3 to 5 years a new underground scene came up, some kind of new music or something, and the definition of that underground scene was in rebellion of the mainstream. 80s music got so commercial and so homogenous that alternative rock emerged. And it just had a different vibe and a blah 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 blah, a different aesthetic. Talked about different things, and then alternative rock became mainstream. And then what was after that and after that, and so there's this kind of cycles. And it's as if like the meaning of the cycle is to rebel against something, to break down something old and create something new. And there's something kind of very natural about that. And I would almost say it's a form of progress in culture and in the arts. But what we have here is like we're destroying the entire thing, that there are no standards, or, like, what do they call it? Mumble rap.
Yes.
This is what I'm saying, to the point where, like, mumble rap. Just look at the damn name of that. It's hilarious. I'm sure I know guys my age that were into hip hop in like the 90s or something, and they're just probably cringing out of their minds. Their teeth are just grinding listening to that.
Well, there's a great video of Snoop Dogg like doing a spontaneous improvised mumble rap because he's mocking the art form. And it's like, I used to listen to a lot of hip hop. I essentially don't listen to it anymore, but I liked Snoop Dogg a lot growing up. And even though he was kind of all, by the time you had the gangster rap, that was already a degeneration of like the conscious racial upbeat rap that was more prominent, like a Tribe Called Quest, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, Diggable Planets, Guru. Yeah.
And you get to Snoop Dogg, and that's already a slide downward. But when like Snoop Dogg is looking at these guys like, it's like he's like, this is retarded. What is going on? And as a quick follow up, it's like it's almost like reality television for music. Like you can make anyone a star by just totally flattening the standard.
You just crushed it, man. That was brilliant. Or Snoop had too much gin and juice. I don't know. Maybe that was the other. Sorry, it's a '90s joke, kids. Sorry about that. So anyway, I guess shall I move on?
Sure.
All right. I think I'm gonna. Well, I don't need to mute you while I'm reading. Let me pull this up. Okay. I theorize that the ability to critique art is the ability to make art. We discussed this a bit earlier. People will place skill and or talent ahead of this. However, with concerted effort over time, these are but physical skills, learned behaviors. Art does not come from the hands. It comes from the spirit, through the mind, in and of the culture. I theorize that the ability to critique art is the ability to make art. Using Bloom's taxonomy, which I have a graphic below, of the cognitive domain, the pyramid from the lowest tier of knowledge to the highest tier of evaluation, the viewer gathers information to interpret the art, synthesize an experience, and come to an evaluation. The artist, in turn, must do the reverse process to create a work of art. He or she has made an evaluation that is so deeply felt as to drive the artist crazy, if not birthed into a work of art. The final state of this process is the art object, a thing of beauty and mystery, a thing enticing viewers to gather knowledge about it in order to unlock its meaning. With time and effort, skill can be acquired to craft art, but not without being a part of this process. The skills to create art are merely a visual language. The question is, what will you then say? Ultimately, one must possess passion and tenacity, live urgently, be able to distill meaning from the suffering of existence, beauty from the din, and pull stars from the abyss. Making art and being an artist are not the same. However, anyone can drink from this immortal fountain with dedication to their form. So you can kind of scroll up a bit and you'll see there's the Bloom's taxonomy one more time. Did you want to respond to that at all? Or
Well, not that this is a direct response to what you read, but I did have a question that kind of popped into my head as I was listening to you. You said that making art and being an artist are not the same. What do you think of this idea that anyone can be an artist?
That's a trick question for me, and I'll tell you why. By profession, I'm an art teacher, other than a freelance illustrator. Look me up at AmericanZarathuster.com. So as an art teacher, you're obviously encouraging people to make art. And you've got students that don't give a flying about art, and they don't want it, they don't like it. And, depending on all these different personality types, etc., you have to play to each one. So you've got the few kids that are kind of the art students, and you might want to mute with I don't know, whatever's going on in the background. So with people who are genuinely interested in the arts, you don't want the others to throw cold water on them. You really, really have to, as an art teacher, you've got to cultivate that and encourage that. Then you have kind of like the middle of the bell curve of people who are just, the average person who doesn't hate art, but doesn't really get it, And then you're going to have like the sort of the jerks that resist it, but actually don't know they could be fantastic artists. Sometimes it's like those rebels that end up being the greatest artists. So this is kind of what I was trying to explain in the article, is that art, in a sense, is a language that you learn. And then in the end, it's really up to you to decide what is it you want to say. So physical skills, yes, they can be learned. And, I don't know, like I said earlier, let's say if you wanted to learn French or Mandarin or German or who knows what, Japanese, then do you think you're just going to learn it in one day a week and maybe in a month? I mean, that's absurd, right? If you really have to apply yourself. So once you get it, and once you acquire skills and you hone those skills, then you're able to sort of sing more clearly. You can get your song across, per se. Some people are just more interested in the graphic arts, for example, fashion design, architecture. I mean, I'm just talking about visual arts alone here. And so, for people who just want to go into graphic design, for example, then that's fine. That's their personality type. You see, they don't, I think when I say making art and being an artist are different, I would say that and in my opinion, the true artist is someone who is driven, who has to say things. They must make art, otherwise they can't live. That's really the true artist, and it's something that an art teacher really shouldn't say to their students, because it'd be like, okay, I'm out of here, like that they're just gonna check out, So like, teaching art for New York State or Massachusetts or whatever state that you're in, you're a teacher. You have to follow rules and show grades and yada yada, but. In reality, it's kind of it's a social, emotional, cognitive development tool for young people. And so when one is an adult, then that's when they're mature enough to kind of have their own voice. And so like the answer that I have for you depends on the age of the person listening. If it's a 13-year-old girl who loves Japanese comics, I'm going to say, hey, great, you did that and that's nice and you got some skills there. So what's next? Let's move forward. Let's get better at this. In a case like that, it's somebody who is socially driven. They want to impress their friends. That's normal for 13 years old, right? So, but if you're 30 years old and you're still doing that, okay, you have a problem here, So you better get out and get some life experience, start reading more and experiencing more and challenging yourself. But ultimately, the artist, I think kind of the issue of it is really having an eye towards critiquing yourself. And I'm sure people in sports do the same thing. People in business, you have to have that kind of that thing, where you are able to look at yourself objectively and critically, in order to make better art. But yeah, I don't know. Someone might disagree with me, and I'd be willing to talk about that. But I feel that the true artist is really someone that doesn't have a choice. It's a personality type that you're born with. And by saying that, I'm, really, really, really do not want to discourage anybody who loves the arts, wants to learn the arts, but doesn't feel like they're that kind of person. You still should do it. You should still find it, because there's something about it. I don't know how to describe this, but it's kind of like being an astronaut of inner space. You learn more about yourself and your culture through doing the arts. And I feel like balance is what one needs to have. If you just do sports, pick up guitar or something, or if you just do arts, then, do some sports, get it some balance in your life, be a full person. So anyway, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, let's continue.
Okay. All right. So moving on, heading towards the finishing line here. In the Europe of old, artisans, artists, and craftsmen were a dime a dozen, as they held much more significant roles in functional society, such as typography, weaving, pottery, architecture, portrait painting, sculpture, and the like. One can see the primitive charm of Eastern Orthodox portraits of saints in its flat and decorative simplicity, and moved as much as they are by this and stunned by the imperceivable brush of a Vermeer maiden, Vermeer being a Dutch painter. Artists and art lovers alike hone your critical thinking skills by asking of each artwork what it is and why do you like it or dislike it. Understand fully the context of the art movement, and the creator to find its place in the mosaic of the white experience. Test the relationship between the artwork's form and message. Interrogate the artwork to test the means by which it makes its statement, and if it has something worth saying. So that right there is really, really, really critical. People sit, they look at paintings like they watch TV. You should question it, like, intensely, and that's kind of the point of that.
Yeah, it's not a passive you're not a passive recipient of whatever it is that you're viewing or consuming. It should be an active process. And this, another thing that drives me crazy, it makes it hard for me to talk to people who are maybe not so much for thinking.
Yeah.
If I ask them, well, what do you like about this? Why do you like this? Why does this appeal to you? And they just shrug, eyes glaze over. And it's like there are moments where I can't quite articulate why I like something. I can always articulate why I don't like something. That's easier for me to do. But I mean, I'm almost, if I can't understand something, like I almost don't participate in it, if that makes sense. You know, if I can't put into words in some way what I think is trying to be done, then it means I need to do something else to be able to really enjoy it or really understand it. Does that make sense?
Let me interrupt you for a second. You really just hit the bottom line there when you said, if I can't understand something, I don't want to. I'm not phrasing what you said just a moment ago. Like, I don't want to put an effort into understanding it if I can't tell you why I don't like it. Well, that's postmodernism. You know, it's I'll give you an example. A recent exhibit, some Hispanic guy with AIDS. He fills up a corner. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be cold about that. But the corner of a room in a gallery, he fills it up with candies that are wrapped up in, you know, individual candies, like hard candies. And it's a pile of candy on the floor in an art gallery. And, you know, just to see that, they're all, the candies are all like yellow. They're butterscotch or something. And, you know, there's a little sign on the wall that says, you know, feel free to have a candy. And, you know, it somehow that's supposed to represent all the people that died of AIDS, and that by eating a piece of candy, you're internalizing one person, which is kind of gross in a weird way, you know? And so, but like, otherwise it's just a damn pile of candy on the floor, you know what I'm saying? And like, I don't want to eat candy that's on the floor, but anyway, that's me. So that's where I'm going with this. It's like, you needed a little piece of paper on the wall to explain it. You failed. You're a failure as an artist. Get out of here. You're a mockery of this institution of art. You know, but it's conceptual. Yeah, man, anybody can be an artist. Sorry, you know, maybe in La La Land, maybe that goes, but not in Western civilization. You know?
Well, this is what I was getting at with the question before. It used to be the case that if you were a painter or a sculptor, then you basically had to study the human form, whether that meant like attending autopsies or something.
Anatomy.
Like, right. Yeah. You needed to know how to, you know, formulate every striation of the muscle and proportionality and things like that. And so when I asked before, can anyone really be an artist? You were mentioning before this abstract conceptual art. It's totally, I don't know, I won't say definitively that these people aren't studying anatomy and physiology, for example, but it's certainly not evident in what they're making. It's completely divorced. I think some other people, I can't think of who said this before, maybe Roger Scruton. Like, it's not representational. Like, that's kind of the difference between, you know, what's considered classical art and anything in the more modern era, is that it was representational. It was about something that was a true form in the world. You're trying to create or recreate the most perfect form of the human body, and there's nothing like that anymore. So it's like, if you can't do those, exactly, if you can't do those things, or if you're not even interested in those things, then you're not an artist, because there should be like a representational element to it.
Well, you're not a Western artist, you know, like, so like, for example, I studied in Japan and Taiwan, and they have their traditional arts are based in Taoism, which is that, you know, this their indigenous philosophy of, you know, man's relationship with nature. And that's a whole other show that we could get into. But, you know, their art form, every artist is sort of proven by how well they carry on the tradition. They're proud of a 5,000-year-old culture. And for someone to like destroy it and deconstruct it into mush, it would be considered like I mean, offensive or just ridiculous, and they wouldn't pay any attention. If you're innovating it, if you're using abstract expressionism and you're combining it in such a way where you can do a landscape, for example, and the landscape becomes even stronger and more mystical and more engaging and more beautiful, then you won. And that's what we can do with modern art. That's probably what we should do, is somehow, resuscitate some of that. It is part of our history, and take it and go somewhere with it. So, for example, like people who do abstract expressionism today, the ones that, I don't know how to say this, to some extent, it's almost decorative art. It's non-objective, right? There's no, you can't see a person or a landscape inside it, but you see forms and balance and harmony and symmetry and all those things we've discussed with elements and principles. And if it gives you an aesthetic experience, then it's succeeded. You see, so it doesn't have to be about whatever the Chartres Cathedral or something, crossing the Delaware with George Washington or something like that. It can just be an aesthetic experience. That's okay. So I guess this is sort of where I'm just trying to, make lemonade out of lemons here. Should I continue?
Yeah, let's continue.
Okay. All right. I hope we haven't put your viewers to sleep yet.
No, there's more people than have been watching the whole time. So.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you for everyone. Okay, so moving on. White artists are to be held to the same standard as warriors, for their activity threatens and destabilizes radical leftist establishments. He or she must rescue the white narrative from subversive parasitic ideologies that have infiltrated the Western mythos since Roman times or before. The usurper's game is to break all our rules, to demoralize men and steal our brides, to drive virulently against beauty in an adolescent rebellion of vulgarity and anti-art, mute in technique and neurotically feminist. The white artist must know and master all the elements and principles of art, must speak this language eloquently and wield it as a surgeon his blade. The white artist sings from the heart, not through the echo chamber of commercially viable formats, other cultural dialects, and auto-tune technology. White artists must form their own media platforms, their own sales networks, their own cultural venues, never needing to qualify to the art world and its diversity quotas. Whites are the sun around which our enemies revolve. Their envy of white civilization, the gravity that draws them to us. We wish them peace and prosperity within their own ethno-cultural zones, but never need to qualify to them. Better yet, don't validate their degenerate art by giving it any acknowledgement whatsoever.
So
go on.
Finish your thought.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I should just tell you that the first version I gave to Tony at the White People's Press, he said, this is a family magazine. You're going to have to edit that. Like it was too offensive, actually.
Really?
And I think a little bit of that shone through here. I do want to qualify that. Like I love cultural arts. I love them all. I have no, the degeneracy the degenerate art that I'm talking about is specifically people who are engaged in anti-white art, or anti-Western civilization art. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I mean, I love. Again, some echo again.
Okay, there goes my mute. Hold on, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Brazil a few times, so I really love like the Brazilian samba or their funk style of music. That's something I talked about with Jared back on Heel Turn. If you're to get like all personality psychology about it, if you are high in trait openness, not that I'm trying to Jordan Peterson post here, but you can't help but want to seek out these different, ethnocultural zones, so to speak, and kind of float around them. So, I mean, I absolutely understand that, having appreciation for all these other things. But to kind of directly get to this paragraph, this is something that I think is true on a broader scale about the the white dissident, whatever political movement, which is just the need for our own institutions, whether they're banking, financial institutions, legal institutions, things like that. But when I think specifically about art, this is the thing that also kind of bothers me, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. It does seem like whites have lost the plot when it comes to when I think about music, right? When I think about the kinds of music I see, popular music mainly. When I think about the kinds of popular music I see other white people playing at a club or whatever, it's always like it's too derivative. So they're trying to do some they're just trying to reimagine 1973, or it's too niche and it's so kind of a microcosm of the problem of whites in general, where it just went so far off in its own direction that it really isn't connected to anything broader. Like it's very esoteric, almost like solipsistic. It's just its own thing. And unless you're really willing to dive that deep into the end of the pool and totally immerse yourself in this tiny, niche subculture, then it doesn't really have any broader appeal. So I don't know if you can if that's something that you've noticed, and maybe if you can even speak to how a white popular music or a musical style could come back to something that isn't just derivative or like hopelessly self-referential.
For starters, you are amazingly, how do I put this? You have a great sense of aesthetic sensitivity. Like it's really shows. It's very, very powerful, the way that you express yourself and your understanding specifically of music. And
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would say I have that level for the visual arts. And so it's really like, oh, I feel like I'm at home now, like it's nice to be able to talk about this stuff. And I'm hearing you loud and clear. There's something really painful about watching that too. This sort of like, it's sort of like a charade, of like, let's recreate the past, or let's recreate these musical tropes, these musical identities of, rock stars or whatever it might be. And I gotta say, I think that's just kind of the growing pains of the artist. They're we're all there at some degree. Like someone who is 20 years older than us will look back at us and cringe, and say like, oh, you keep going there, laddie, just keep plotting along. So, but that's a really, really interesting question. I think I want to encourage our listeners to definitely tune in to the White Art Collective on YouTube on a regular basis. That show is doing some amazing things, at least giving a platform for people who are conscious of being white and make white music per se. I don't really know what to call it. I don't know if there's a name for it yet, but Jack White and Hireth. I hope I'm not murdering her name. Hireth.
She's in the audience, actually.
Oh my God! Well, God bless her. I wish I could give her a big hug and a kiss.
Volk Dissident too.
Volk Dissident. My God, I've been talking with him. Actually, I have some of his music as a background on one of the videos that I put out for the Seraph with Mark Brahman. And just wow! I mean, there is a movement happening. We are the only platform and voice for these people, and they're our people, and it's our movement, it's our time. And so, I just really, really encourage everyone to get behind it, because they say, what is it? Politics is downstream from culture. That's almost becoming a meme by now, but it's true, and it's all about who we are. And so we have to produce content. This, of course, brings me back to Mark Brahman and I doing the Seraph comic book, for example. But it's, unfortunately, the current paradigm of American culture is extremely commercial. Mm-hmm. And they, like, for example, I forget those, I don't watch these shows anymore, but it's like America's Got Talent, people go on and sing. And everyone sounds exactly like the last one. They all wear the same clothes, have the same hairstyles. it's a celebration of mediocrity. It's they're rewarded for conforming to one corporate style. It makes you want to gag. So yeah, I mean, that's why we have to make maybe we're the underground movement. We should rebel against that, have our own voices. Be more natural. So yeah,
not related to the article, but somebody in the chat had a question. Pepe sells, but who's buying? Which is still the best avatar.
I'm sorry, I didn't get one more time.
Pepe sells, but who's buying?
Ah, yes.
And he has a Dave Mustaine Pepe, which is great.
Nice. Love Pepe.
He asks, this was just to the chat, but I'll turn it over to you.
Oh.
Any opinion on Martina Markota and her aesthetic?
Oh my God, that's amazing. Interestingly, Martina Markota and I started the artrightmagazine.com. So the site is really kind of in limbo at the moment, but about 2 years ago, I really don't even remember how I connected with her. But anyway, somehow we connected, and we both thought, we need to make an art movement. Like, this is our time. We're artists. She's an artist. I'm an artist. Let's work together. At first we started, okay, are we going to have like a private chat forum? Okay, what are we going to do? Let's have a YouTube channel. This, that, and the other thing. She went through a lot of career changes, issues, and she moved to England, and it's just life happens basically. And so all these plans and things that we got started never really had a chance to kind of finish. And then she went her own way and started Lady Alchemy, which is her own comic book. And I think it's pretty sweet. She got a great artist, and her YouTube channel is quite interesting. I was tuned in just last night, and she was literally talking about alchemy, which is a really, really difficult topic to understand, I think, for a lot of people. It's extremely esoteric. But she's got this idea of it's sort of like the Gothic alt-right, which I think is a really unique take. Her heart is in the right place. She's very bright. I think people have to look past how beautiful she is and start actually listening to her.
Well, she's a mathematician, so she's not a stupid person.
Yeah, and I mean, I really don't have anything bad to say about her. I just wish, I wish her all the success. I really want to collaborate with her. We're both, our plates are really full right now. Me with Mark Brahman and her doing her thing. But I feel like there, at some point, and hopefully through, the White People's Quarterly and White Art Collective and your show and others, that this whole movement can somehow get under one umbrella. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? So to answer the aesthetic, that it's of what? I mean, she's got video, she does performance art, her comic books. I've seen her burlesque, and it's much more than just burlesque. There's a real art form to it. There's some high aesthetic realm. I mean, as a full-blooded male, I'm not going to deny that it's like, wow, man, the temperature just went up in this room. Like, what happened there? It's extraordinary in that regard. But also, she would, I don't know how to say this. There's a lot of really great photography of her, and you kind of have to give the photographer credit, obviously, for that as well. But she plays a role in the design of those things. Here's another person that's contributing so much to white art consciousness. So yeah, if there could be some kind of our own gallery, our own show, or something where there was some sort of an umbrella to bring us all together. And then if we had funding, gosh, that would be fabulous, wouldn't it?
Well, that is the diaspora question, because not only are we spread across continents, but those of us who are racially aware and creating stuff are spread even further. So it is tricky. Somebody in the chat, I think he probably meant this as a joke, but I'll turn it to you anyway. He says, burlesque, disavow. So for those of us that are sensitive to the degeneracy question, how should we regard, art forms that are, frankly, sexual in nature, like burlesque? Yeah. It's not pornographic for sure, but it's definitely erotic, and that's, I think, might be part of the distinction. But you take it away.
Well, okay, erotic art is let's say a genre of art. Okay, like, the Western painting where you have, cowboys out on the desert. That's a genre, right? So there's genres of art, and I've seen some that are very kind of bawdy and like crass and meant to be kind of like bathroom humor type stuff, which I personally don't care for. And then you've seen others that are genuinely erotic in the sense that I don't think you should be kind of ashamed of that feeling, that it's a natural human instinct. And if it's done in a way that I feel is tasteful, that's kind of what it boils down to. I would say erotic art probably has to have the highest aesthetic standard of them all, because it's so close to kind of degeneracy or degenerate art that you have to be very careful about how that looks. And frankly, I probably shouldn't say this. I hope this isn't going to destroy my career, but I did actually work at an erotic art fair convention once to try it out, to think like, okay, I'm going to make some work. I'm going to see if I can do this convention. How well will the art sell?
You're canceled. It's over. You're done.
Right. I got to hand in my alt-right ID card. Oh my God.
Right.
Pull back a bit. Like, if you're a working artist, you want to make a living as an artist, you can't just, it's like you have to be like a chef. You can't just make ham sandwiches. You got to be able to make anything for what people want.
I think you're muted. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? I'm so sorry. So I got so excited I muted. No, sorry.
It's that damn Martina Marcota again.
Yeah, she's behind the scenes. No. So yeah, whatever. You can't just make one kind of art. You have to check out different markets. I tried it out. I realized this isn't for me. There's a lot of weirdos in there, and I just thought, if I do like certain kinds of erotic art. I mean, I'm picky about what kind of art I like, and if it's very beautiful, I like it. And Martina is a master at it. I would say she's at the master level of that. So she owns that world, and that's something to be honored with. I think that's an honorable title. But yeah, again, it's to some extent, you hold those standards, like I was talking about throughout the whole show, and then you can judge those things. And everyone's different too. Like, we all have different personalities. Me personally, I feel like that's an extremely private and intimate thing, and I don't like it when it's grotesquely over the top sexual. That to me is more borderline pornographic, and that's just a different thing. To me, it's no longer art. I feel that Martina's just doing a fantastic job at doing Martina. So there you go. There's quite a lot to her too, and in terms of like her work. I don't know if I should call her a journalist or what exactly the title is for what she does. But it's amazing, and I think it'd be great if we had more people like her in our movement.
Yeah, it's something I think about a lot, and I do want to be careful about how I say this, but in the same way, I think about it in terms of like sports. So like I've done a lot of martial arts. I watched, UFC for many years. You kind of recognize that the people who are entering into the cage are people who would have stepped onto the battlefield, decades ago, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. That bio person doesn't change. They don't go away just because we have roads and
telephones.
Exactly right. And in the same way, and I don't mean this about Martina, but speaking more broadly, there's a long tradition of what you could call burlesque or sexual art or erotic art. And in the same way that there's, like psychopathic murderers, there kind of are, again, being really careful, not saying this about Martina, not trying to piss people off. There's a long history of like, frankly, more sexually liberated women. How would you put this? More comfortable with nudity, and that's part of their art form, whatever. I mean, I'll be really crass. Just you have psycho murderers and you have sluts, and history is filled with both of them. Not that I'm saying anyone that we're talking about fits into either of those categories, but it's like, are you going to stop that kind of genetic lineage just by decreeing it and then putting it into a law and then saying, well, we will never have this ever again? It's like there does need to be some negotiation of the different types of people. And there is a high art way, I think, to do anything. Like there's some things that I like that are kind of shitty, but the person injects like a high-mindedness into it that elevates it, right? So like, I don't really like a lot of punk rock music, but there's high-minded punk rock music that elevates it beyond the genre. It becomes kind of transcendental. It's not just the thing that it is. It is that plus something else. And so like burlesque, I think, is kind of like that too. So like in my show, when I perform, I mean, there is a slightly erotic, because we have female dancers, we have female actors, people who come on stage with us, and they're not dressed like Mormons. They're not. They're not dressed like Hasidic Jewish women. I mean, it's sexual, and
no burqas. Is what you're saying.
Right. That's exactly. There has to be some negotiation of that, because it has a place. And even if it didn't have a place, it would find a way into your society anyway. And you kind of have to negotiate that. But I'll turn it back to you.
Well, what I find interesting here is this is opening up another discussion. How do I put this? Women in the arts have their own experience, and it just turns out that a lot of times their body has something to do with that experience, and they channel that into their art. And obviously in her case, she's extraordinarily beautiful, but it's not just the looks, it's the way she moves and her whole composition about what she does. So that's just a curious way, like, for example, to apply critique. We're critiquing this, and that's a good thing. We would really need a work of art of hers to actually look at critically, like something in front of us per se. But I think that that on the flip side, the art world right now is entirely a feminist domain. It is totally owned and run by feminists and LGBT. There's obviously they right now the hot thing is people of color. Like, there's a major focus on African Americans specifically. A lot of money being channeled in that direction. But feminists are kind of in charge of it all. They're the backbone of it. I generally theorize that if you were to crush feminism, the entire left would fall. I think of that as like the heart that beats the beast, beats within the beast. So that's my strategy. But anyway, so if you have, I'm going to say that I feel like feminists are women who have kind of failed in some regard in terms of like they can't compete in society. They can't operate by the normal traditional channels about the norms of society, and so they try to destroy society. They try to destroy gender, et cetera, and their art, like feminist art. I don't even want to say the things that they do, but you can kind of literally, like, there's a woman in Paris who had some kind of scaffolding she was standing on with a canvas on the ground, and she filled empty eggs with paint and squat them out of her private parts onto this canvas, and it fully nude in public, and that's feminism. And we've seen those crazy protests where they write, slut or I am God or something on their naked chests, and they run into the church. And, we've seen these videos. Well, those videos are part of feminist art. That's part of that whole culture, that kind of screaming banshee type mentality. But it comes back to my point, though. It's about their bodies. There's something connected there. So that's not my field of expertise. So I'm not going to really embarrass myself and try to pontificate about that. It'd be better to get Martina on the show to speak for herself.
Oh, absolutely. Well, anyway, let's nice digression. I appreciate you for hearing that. Let's turn our attention to the final paragraph of this essay, and we'll bring the show home.
All right, sounds great. I thank you so much, by the way, for having me and indulging me so intensely here. So, last paragraph: whites, the Aboriginals of the Western Way, can only look over this Babylon from the glorious vistas of our art history and return to the homelands of our collective spirit. Our voice is timeless, honoring our ancestors, passing the torch to our children's children. The sub-theme of white art being impenetrable to cultural Marxism. Our enemies have only envy. They define themselves by being, quote, not us. White art is to preserve and progress our artistic traditions and identity unmolested by alien influencers, exuding greatness. We don't wish to seem. We use art as a virtue or use art as a virtue signaling device. Leftist art grows ever more radical for social commodity points among the gallery ghosts in a symbolic war against an imagined oppressor. Whites are whole in our humanity. Our very blood is pride manifested. Our pride is a truth. Postmodern art dedicates itself wholly to silencing. Though our many ethnicities are a kind of rainbow fracture, we are born of the same genetic light. We wish to make ever more heavenly aesthetic experiences of our heroic ideals. The end. So there you go, folks. Thank you so much for indulging me on that. I had to go out with a glorious bang, on that. Again, the ideal here is to embolden our people, to encourage our people, to pull back the curtain and let the light back in. And that's, I'm trying to craft words in such a way and ideas in such a way that does that.
Yeah, this is a powerful essay. And you said you wrote about a dozen more?
It's funny because just today, Tony at White Art, sorry, I always get
Press.
Yeah, White People's Press. Sorry, I'm losing my mind. He just today said, okay, we're taking submissions. We need more of this and that. And so I contacted him like immediately, and I got all kinds of stuff for you. So really, most of what I have is poetry, short stories, and visual art. I have 3 degrees, in art, and I really would love to do more writing of this nature. So I really don't know if I'm going to continue doing that. I kind of enjoy doing the short stories and the poems as far as like writing as a medium. But I think there's only so much you can say about postmodernism. It's just a hell show. It's garbage. So the main thing really was to kind of knock that down and bring our people up. That's kind of the point.
Very well said. Well, Donald, we'll be doing this again real soon, I'm sure.
Awesome.
You're a busy man, so I don't know when that'll happen, but it'll definitely happen again.
Well, Mark and I are going to be on Jefferson Lee on September 6th, which I believe is a Friday. And I did message him. I said, it would be interesting if you, him, and I had a show just discussing martial arts, because I've done Kung Fu for like 20 years. So I would love to just do like a martial arts nerd out show. That'd be fun. That's
a great idea. Yeah, I would totally be down for that.
Cool.
I think Jefferson and I both have stories to tell. I don't want to spoil any of his, but he's got some doozies.
Woo! Well, we'll save it.
All right. So to the audience, thank you for joining us tonight. Look out for Sunday's McSpencer Group. Mm-hmm. Monday, Eugene, who writes for the European Freedom, will be on to discuss what's called theological non-cognitivism. It's kind of this. Wow. It's kind of an alternative to atheism. So that'll be an interesting conversation. John Q. Publius will be back as well.
Very good.
Tyler Hamilton will be returning to discuss Edmund Husserl some more. And a whole bunch. Actually, tomorrow, I think. Jesus. Tomorrow, I'm going to have a bloody Marxist on the program.
Oh, boy.
Tomorrow, 11 a.m. Zachary, well, maybe I don't know if I should be saying his name, actually. We haven't worked that out. He's a guy who's a Marxist, and that'll be on
Zach
tomorrow.
the Marxist. Okay.
Zach the Marxist. Yeah,
There
that's
you go.
actually that's pretty vague. And
there you go. I've got the idea for my next comic book now. There you go.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, folks, thank you so much. How do I end this broadcast? All right,
Hey,
we're gonna do it.
last thing, go to hyperboreanplanet.com and download our comic book. Mark Brauman and I did it together. So hyperboreanplanet.com.
Yes, absolutely. Make sure you pick up a copy. Folks, take care.
Good night.